Is this the future of the MLS? As you know by now, Major League Soccer has decided to change its schedule. The idea is to transition to a more traditional fall through spring schedule starting in late 2027. That gives the MLS a calendar that makes more sense and that should work better with international fixtures. And as you can see here, the corporation has given us all sorts of nice corporate speak reasons why this is a good idea. But of course, some fans don't like the change. However, to understand why this is happening and to understand why I personally think this is a good idea, you've got to understand the underlying history first. So let's go way back and see how we got to where we are today. The American Soccer League began way back in 1921. The league has become legendary over the years for being the first viable professional soccer league in the United States history. That first 1921-22 season started in September and continued on through May. And even though that meant playing in less than ideal conditions, nobody at the time thought this was strange. And that makes sense, right? I mean, okay, for this video, I'm going to call the sport soccer instead of football, so apologies if I trigger you. Soccer and the other variants of rugby were originally played during the school year in English schools anyway. It feels like a more natural sport to play in the fall and in the spring. And the American Soccer League kept that schedule for years, extending deep into the amateur years of the league. These were the battle days of American soccer, back when the domestic leagues were lucky to get even a mention in the newspapers. And as a result, only the geekiest sports historians even know that the league was still a thing. Now, the interesting thing is that switch from a traditional schedule to a summer-only schedule doesn't seem to have been intended to be a permanent thing. In fact, when it happened, I really don't think anybody really believed at the time that soccer was really a viable commercial sport in the United States. Soccer enjoyed renewed popularity in the United States after the 1966 World Cup. Because millions of Americans watched the few matches that were shown in the United States, officials became convinced that the sport was actually viable. And so it seemed that a new era in sports in the United States was about to unfold. For reasons that are somewhat bizarre, 2 professional leagues were formed in 1967, not just one. The United Soccer Association, yeah, that's right, the USA, was made up of foreign clubs who treated the competition as a brief foreign tour of friendlies. And so it was only natural that the schedule would go from late May to mid-July. The rival National Professional Soccer League went from April to September that season. And so it was only natural that the North American Soccer League, which was the merger of those 2 organizations in 1968, would also have a summer schedule. So people have speculated a lot over the years about whether this is because of the weather or because of competition from American football or whatever else. Actually, when you really look at the history, it seems, at least to me, that they made this decision in order to attract European clubs to come and be part of the United Soccer Association for that one season. Nobody really seems to have thought twice about that. Of course, it's been almost 60 years now. You would think that there would be a strong tradition of summer soccer in the United States by now, right? Actually, for most Americans, there really isn't much tradition to speak of. Like the NASL before it, the MLS still has the feeling of a Johnny-come-lately league, something relatively unestablished and somewhat foreign. And it's not like there's never been a bad weather game in the MLS either, or even in the NASL for that matter. All of this arguing that I'm seeing about northern climates and cold weather teams ignores the actual history of the sport in North America. As surprising as it might seem, we actually have had snow games in the history of the MLS. Believe it or not, the presence of snow didn't destroy the sport or cause fans to just not show up. It's kind of hard to see how this would be the end of the world. Perhaps the most famous example was the first home game of the NASL's Toronto Blizzard, a team that took the place of the bankrupt Toronto Metro's Croatia in 1979. Despite another classic Ontario April blizzard, the players played on. The team really lived up to its name. And about 18,500 fans showed up despite the weather, though the Toronto Star noted that most of those fans had free tickets. And you know, Toronto actually did well in the worst years of the NASL. So in 1983 and in 1984, when the NASL was really on its last legs, the Toronto Blizzard drew over 10,000 fans a game. So I guess a little bit of snow never really hurt anybody. Anyway, some of the reaction I've seen online from MLS fans is a bit over the top. Sure, the MLS will compete with other major sports, but its final was already competing with those same sports. If you've ever gone through an MLS save in Football Manager, you already know that the different transfer window really screws things up. It just makes more sense to have a transfer window that is aligned with the rest of the world. Now, honestly, I wouldn't be that surprised to eventually see a change in other countries as well. I mean, I know that Norway, Sweden, Finland, countries like that have winter weather that's not exactly conducive to the traditional schedule. But places like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, you really should consider making an adjustment. And even up there in Scandinavia, I've got to wonder whether the eventual creation of more indoor stadiums could eventually help the sport align better with the rest of the world. However, the fact that I think this is a good idea doesn't mean that I buy into the benefits the MLS is selling us. I mentioned that first one already, that would be the global transfer market activity. And the second point is basically saying the same thing. But the biggest problem that the MLS faces in the transfer market is actually the stupid salary cap structure. You create these crazy salary rules that really only ensure the best North American players will go play in Europe instead of staying home. And then you go out and you spend incredible money so Messi can have his retirement tour in Miami. Now, I'm not saying that I think that Messi is like phoning it in or anything like that. Actually, on the contrary, I think he's been a lot of fun to watch, and I do think he's been good for the league overall. But as a Football Manager fanatic, I've really got to wonder why in the world the MLS seems to be allergic to developing its own wonder kids. And then there's this bit here about elevating the playoffs, which I think is really stupid. My biggest problem with this is the concept of an extended playoff system in general. So if you look back at something like the 1972 NASL season, you'll see that the playoffs were short, 3 games and that was it. That meant that the regular season at least meant something, though I still don't like the idea of 50% of the teams making the playoffs. Remember that the New York Cosmos didn't make the playoffs in 1975. That was the first year that they had Pelé. Only 8 of the 20 teams made the playoffs that year, which still seems a little bit high to me. But there's probably no surprise that the NASL then expanded the playoffs to 12 teams in 1976. After all, the fact that the league's darling team was still a second-place team shouldn't have kept them out of the playoffs, I guess. Anyway, I don't know. It seems to me that the Cup serves as a good playoff system and that you really should emphasize the value of regular season games by not having a separate playoff there as well. Now, I know that endless playoffs are the North American way, but I've always felt that this is really silly and I'm not a fan of it in any sport. Well, I mean, what's the point of playing all these regular season games if half the teams make the playoffs anyway? But I do think that the change in schedule is going to be a good thing in the end. This is a step in the right direction, and I really think it's something that we should support. Now, this won't make the league relevant overnight, but it does give me a lot of faith for the future.
Here's a steal by Stevie Hunt. Has Canaglia in the middle. Pass for Canaglia. Score!
In fact, my biggest wish is that they would figure out a way to help with the development of young kids here in the United States. We need the MLS to look less like the Superstar Retirement League and to have more of an emphasis on good young players and up-and-coming talent, especially talent that stays in the United States and doesn't just sign with a European team as soon as it becomes good. Anyway, I think that the league can get to that point eventually, though it's going to take a few more changes than just this.